And we're back. Paul, the other thing, we talked about the importance of establishing a process and setting specifications and having to find inputs and outputs. But there's something else that happens. It's not like you do that once and it's okay, it's done. There are iterations of it. And so I know one of the techniques that is talked about is PDSA. And PDSA is plan, do, study, and act, I believe, or adjust. I'm not sure which. Um, and I think most of the organizations that are very much committed to continuous improvement have accepted that that is what you do. It's just part of, yes, we've gone through the work of identifying the process. And if we were talking about selection and we do the interview guides and we have the competencies, but you have to be able to study the results that you're getting and then come back and say, we need to make an adjustment. Process, knowing where you're going helps to identify where we might have problems in that process or need an adjustment in that process. Can you talk about how organizations implement that cycle?
Yes, let's take it back a few years.
Okay.
Late 1800s, 1900s. Walter Schuhart devised a process originally called PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act, and then it was modified slightly to PDSA, Study, Take Action, right, as a means of helping people look at processes and say, how can we make sure that the process is accomplishing what it is supposed to do? And then if it's not, what type of corrective action should we take to
right,
make sure that it comes up to the optimal way of doing the job? In my world, process. That's
right,
what we think about. And so this PDCA or PDSA process says that with every process, and organizations have literally hundreds of processes,
correct,
some big, some small. With each process, they plan, because if you don't plan, you can, if you fail to plan, you can plan to fail. It happens. So you plan the activities. You say, these are the specifications that I need for this particular activity to achieve its objective.
Mm-hmm.
Fine. And then you put into this equation, into this PDCA or PDSA cycle, you put in all of the specific characteristics that you need in order for it to accomplish the job. So you put together the plan, then you implement this plan, and you say, this is what we're going to do.
Right.
And then you do the activity, you watch it. And Dr. Deming wrote this out on a table napkin not too long ago when he was first starting to teach the Japanese how to implement a system and to check it. The input to the process, you plan it, you do the activity, you check or you study the results. Now,
right,
the difference between checking the results and studying the results says, if I check it, I say, okay, it's fine.
right,
It's working okay. But if you study the results, then you're going to evaluate the activity and you're going to say, this is what we can do to make it better.
right.
So we study the activity and we say, does it meet the requirements that we need in order for this to work?
Mm-hmm.
Now, this studying activity, this checking activity, brought into the manufacturing world, and in fact, all manufacturing processes, what we call TQM. Everybody's heard about total quality management. But what that meant was we would look at all of the processes as a statistical approach to accomplish a particular objective. We would measure the activity. We would study the activity. We would
right,
collect the data to make sure that it is doing it. So we plan it. We do the activity. We study or we check the activity. Then, if activities need to be revised, then we take action. We make sure that we do what we need to do to make the process work better. You know, my old boss said, Dr. Deming, he asked what my title. He asked me my job, and I said, "Well, my job is I'm the managing director of a company, or I'm the president." He says, "No, no, that's a title. Your job is continuous improvement with every process that you have."
Right.
Well, how do we do that? We look at each process. We look at a PDCA approach that Walter Schuhart defined so many years ago. And we do this with each and every process so that we have a total quality management system. Now, what is the one item that is common throughout every process in the organization? And that is the people who are doing the job. The people who are doing the job. And so this is the reason that when we're talking about a selection process, it's even more important that we identify what the requirements are so that we can put the people in their respective places
Right.
to say, this is what happens. Now, many times, organizations and people in the organizations have a tunnel view of the job that they're doing. They only see what is happening in my particular area without looking at the total impact that the role of the employee, the human resources potential that we have within the organization that can really make the difference. So this is the reason that I'm glad that we're spending time talking about this very valuable resource that we have, people. And how do we identify the people? How do we interview them? How do we ask the right questions? And we use this as a process approach to getting good people to do a good job.
Super. Yeah, I think the PDSA or PDCA cycle becomes important. I mean, one of the questions that I oftentimes ask people when I start working with people is, what's your employee turnover percentage of the people that you hire do you lose? And they usually can come back pretty quickly with an answer. But if I ask them, what's your new hire turnover? They go, well, what is new hire turnover? I say, well, those are people who've left in the first year. And and then the question I get back is, well, do you want the regretted or unregretted? And my answer typically is, well, everybody who leaves within the first year ought to be regretted, because if you knew what you were doing, they wouldn't be leaving in less than a year. And oftentimes we find that the biggest 50% hires, they come in and they don't get along with their boss, they don't get along with their coworkers, the job wasn't what they expected it to be, the commute to get to work is too long, something happens that is different than their expectations, and they wind up leaving. So, if you have a way of measuring or looking at what are we expect that when someone is hired, they're going to work at least 2 years. Set that as a goal. Say, okay, I expect that these people are going to stay at least 2 years. I prefer they stayed 3 or 4, but I expect that they're going to stay at least. And if I have a turnover in less than a year, that's bing. There's a yellow card that comes up that says, wait a minute, something's not working here. So to me, that's one of the classic examples of the PDSA is you're constantly as an organization looking at how is this process working? What's an unexpected event in this process? And an unexpected event in terms of hiring and selecting people is people who've left earlier than I anticipated. That makes sense?
Yeah, well, it does. And you brought up a very interesting point that I think all senior management really needs to think about. As I mentioned before, Dr. Deming said managers don't even know the right questions to
Right.
ask. But the issue about retaining employees and turnover, if you start to put that in terms of what is the cost of a turnover,
Oh,
what
yeah.
is the cost that is the impact on the organization? The senior management will say, well, what are our sales this month? Well, sales are so much. What about marketing? Well, marketing is so much. But wait a minute. What about the costs that it takes for us to do the job necessary. And so the cost of retraining, the cost of replacing people, this SPCA, the PDCA cycle that we
Right.
talk about, when we start to study it and we say, what is the cost impact of having to replace somebody? What is the risk-based thinking that we're going to look at and say, what is the risk of losing a new employee or losing an employee who doesn't stay within what we think would be an appropriate period of time to get a return on our investment? And so this is the reason that while we can write papers on quality control, we can write papers on quality assurance, we could look at key performance indicators that say how long have our employees stayed with us? What is the percentage of employees, new employees that have left us because we didn't? And if we take it even further, what about the employees who've been with us for 1 or 2 years and then leave? What is it that we haven't done to meet their expectations of the job? You know, this hiring is a two-way deal.
Yes.
It's like, what are you going to do for us? And I'm going to ask you these questions.
Right.
And then what is the company going to do for you so that we can help you meet your objectives so that you'll be able to stay with us? This means we're going to get a return on our investment in people. That's the reason we encourage people to provide opportunities for employees. So it's getting the right employee, providing them with the resources that they need to advance so we can keep them. So from a management perspective, it's all about money and the bottom line. How is it that we can maximize the effectiveness of the organization, reduce costs, and increase the customer satisfaction that we have?
Right. Yeah, I think in every to teach them what to measure and how to measure it. I mean, I'm sure that there are plenty of people who say, "Oh yeah, we should measure." Now, what do we measure and how do we do that? What advice do you give?
Well, some processes are easily measured.
Right.
You know, we have plus or minus variables. We look at statistical process control and we say, is it above or below the acceptable quality control limit? But some things that are somewhat intangible. I'll give you an example.
Okay.
You go to the Olympics and you see the skaters and they go out on the pond on the rink and they perform their exercise.
Right.
Well, you don't have just one judge standing there saying, "No, that's an 8 or a 9 or a 10."
Right.
But you have 5 or 6 or 6 or 7 or more judges,
Right.
and they hold up their cards and they say, "This was an 8 performance or a 9 performance,"
Right.
because they are evaluating an intangible. Now, with hiring employees, the question is, well, how do I know? How do I know that this person is doing the right job? How do I know that they are meeting my expectations? And so then we can say, let's put together some measurement criteria that says, let's evaluate once the employee has joined the organization, let's evaluate their performance. Don't call it an employee review, but say, let's review the process. Let's see how well you're doing the job. Maybe you can give us some input as well to say, this is what is happening that will be able to help us to help you do your job better. And so it is a two-way street. We can put a quantitative value that says, what on a scale of 1 to 10,
Right.
What are the areas that we need to do to help the employee achieve the maximum performance in their particular activity that they're doing? And so then we can start applying some measurement criteria. We talk about key performance indicators in any of our measurement criteria.
Right.
And these key performance indicators will help us to identify in a management system what areas that we really need to focus on that will help us to achieve the objectives in the organization. It starts with people and people doing their job that helps us take care of the customer. So management will talk about finance. Oh, that's great. We need money to run the company. We need tooling. We need equipment. We need customers.
Right.
But if we don't have the right people to do the right job, we're killing ourselves.
Right.
So we can identify key performance indicators for personnel performance. There are wonderful experts out there. Dr. Fang can probably add more to that as far as how do we measure performance.
Okay.
But it's important to identify the key performance indicators in employee performance based upon what we hired them to do, so that we will know how we can help them achieve their objectives even more.
Right. And I think the important thing that you raise here, and I'm sure that you were implying, is that information should be shared then with the employee too. So if they're going through some kind of evaluation, whether it's a supervisor of them doing the job or some third-party information that comes back from a customer or supplier, something else, those are things that could and should be shared carefully with the person who's actually performing so that they get feedback. And I think one of the things that people equate feedback with negativity. In other words, well, something right. And of course, the best feedback is always balanced, right? So when people are, this is something we talk to managers and supervisors about all the time, you've got to be able to catch people doing something right too. You can't just always look at expected as a negative. It ought to be the deviation from what's expected as a positive as well, and then balance that, and then the feedback becomes useful and valuable.
Let me give you an analogy. We teach in our organization, we teach auditors, okay? Auditors how to audit quality, environment, health and safety, various standards. And when I ask these students, I says, well, what is the role of an auditor? What is the role of an interviewer?
Mm-hmm.
What is the role? Well, it's to find the things that they've done wrong and they have to correct. Well, hold on. Auditors are not policemen.
Right.
Auditors are people who are going to be identifying areas. So we finally come to the point that the role of an auditor is to add value to the process. The role of an interviewer and the role of a supervisor working with an employee is not always a corrective action that says this is something that you need to do better, but it's to work with the employee to say, what is it that you're doing that we can help you do better?
Right.
Okay. It is a cooperative. The big difference is once you develop a cooperative working relationship, we call it a mutually beneficial working relationship. Once you establish that, then you're going to get immediate feedback. Immediate feedback. We had an auditor one time in India. It was the best audit I ever saw. He sat down and he didn't bring out his audit check. He didn't bring out his interview checklist. He didn't bring out his corrective action list. But he sat down and, how's the family? Tell me, how long have you worked here? And the person was opening up and was talking and was sharing ideas. And all of a sudden, the audit was over because it really wasn't an audit. It was an exchange of ideas that the employee gave to the auditor. The same token is that getting the employee to identify the things that they've been hired to do that says, this is something that we can do to make it better. And so this is how we can add more value to the employee-employer working relationship that began with the interviewing process at the very beginning. Right. And so then we develop that. Plan, do, check or study, take action. And this is a continual loop. It never stops. Right. Somebody said to me, I said, we have to continually do this. And I said, well, how long? They said, how long do we have to do this? And I said, forever. Yes, it never stops. And so this is where this process approach is aspects of the job that they're doing. And you may have 1,000 processes in the organization. based upon some individual's interaction with an about robotics. And I've gone to companies that have very few employees, but a lot of robotics. And they say, well, then maybe the employee relationship is not that important anymore. We're dealing with machines, with AI, right? We're dealing with AI. And so now we say, but who are the employees who are going to be maintaining the machines? Who are the employees who are going to be thinking ahead long enough to say, this is what we need to do to take care of our customers? So the role of the employee maybe is changing, right, maybe is evolving into something new. And it's our job as practitioners of developing management systems or developing people to identify what these changes are and how we can help develop processes so that we can measure and monitor and improve all of these activities. So it's very important, this process approach, not only in hiring, identifying aspects of an individual's job, but also how we can help them develop them even more. And having their input is very important.
Yeah, this whole topic of competencies that we're addressing, we're saying in selection, as Van was sharing in the research, still the structured interview, which is a competency-based interview, is the number one predictor of job success. And so one of the things we'll be talking about later is as we go through the interviewing process, one of the things that we always recommend with people is that you sit down with the new hire and you tell them why you hired them. I used to do seminars and I would ask the audience, I would say, I'm going to ask some of you to share some of a personal experience, but would you please tell me why you were hired and put into the current job that you're in? And there would be dead silence. Crickets. Yeah. Nobody would raise their hand. I said, so none of you has any idea why you were hired to do what you're doing. And I realized right then and there that there's probably very little feedback that occurs at the point of hiring as to, Paul, the reason we hired you is because we were looking for these things, and this is what, boy, there's a good news story if I ever heard one, right? It's there's almost no bad news to give. So what better time to open the door to feedback than when you hire somebody and you can tell them, oh, we hired you and here's why. Here's what we saw. This is what you did. Now they're more receptive.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I remember every one of Dr. Deming's seminars, especially in small group sessions. He would start out by saying, what is your job?
Yeah.
And people would look around and say, I'm not quite sure why he asked that question. I mean, is he questioning what I'm doing? He was asking to see if people really recognize what their role and responsibility was in achieving the objectives of an organization. And in every organization that we have, it's important to have the value of the employee taken into consideration to say, tell me what we can do to make things better. A short story, if I may. A long time ago, I was in the disk drive business, and we were building a disk drive, and we had this continuing problem. And we asked all the engineers to come over, and the engineers were all standing around scratching their heads. Well, I don't know, maybe we need to do this, and I look across the way, and here was this elderly lady working on the assembly line. Mm-hmm. And she would pick up one part and go, no, put it over here. Pick up another one and say, okay, put it over here. And I watched her, and she was dealing with the same part, trying to really discover what the problem was. I went over and asked her, and I said, so Ethel, that was her name, Ethel, why are you separating? She says, well, these parts have a dark color, and I know they're bad. Really? And I took it over here. So I go back to the engineers. I said, hey, guys, the dark colors are bad, and the good colors are the white colors are good. Well, how did you know that? Because I asked Ethel, who's on the assembly line, who does the job every day, and she understands what the job is. She understood that she went beyond just putting two parts together. Right. She made a decision. This is good, this is bad. And so all of a sudden, these engineers are saying, maybe we should listen to people who know what their job is and can contribute to the overall success of the organization. And so the interviewing process, identifying the specification for the people that we need, continually checking to see if it's meeting the specified objectives.
Right.
What can we do to make it better? Okay.
Mhm.
And so this process approach, even if you used a statistical approach to meeting upper and lower control limits,
Right.
Are we losing employees? Do we hire somebody and they stay with us a week and leave?
Mhm.
Well, we've spent a lot of money. Do we hire people, bring them in, we train them, we give them all the experience, and then a month later they take all of this experience and knowledge and leave?
Right.
You know, what is it that we need to do to reevaluate our process? So it goes beyond not only the employees' responsibilities for a PDCA approach,
Right.
but also from a management's perspective. These podcasts are very important for people to step back, look at what they're doing, and to reevaluate perhaps their approach of selecting good quality, competent people to do the job necessary.
Right. You know, that point about the plan, do, check, or study and act is something I had a discussion years ago with the manager. We were talking about performance evaluations. And he said, "But we only do performance evaluations at the end of the year." I said, "Well, what about performance feedback? Are you giving performance feedback?" And they said, "Well, how would I give performance feedback?" And I said, "Well, when you hired the person, you were looking for certain things. So what you were doing is you were predicting what you thought was going to happen with the employee. So if there's a deviation in the process between what you thought was going to happen and what you see happening, you should be providing some feedback." And they looked at me and said, "Well, yeah, I guess so, but it's not time for the performance review." I said, "Well, don't set your watch by that." He said, "Well, how often should we be giving feedback?" I said, "Until we stop paying you." You know?
Well, yeah, and feedback too. You know, we have the same thing. People do in companies management reviews. Management. Well, how often do you do that? Once a year.
Right.
Well, I'm sorry, but that's not going to accomplish the task.
Right.
So unless you're giving constant feedback,
Right.
constant these little ways of adjusting the process. I
Right.
used to fly a plane all the time, and I had to adjust where I was going, depending upon the compass. So we need to have the personnel performance compass within the organization to know, are we going to be able to meet the objective and land where we wanted to land? So we need to increase our feedback, maybe on a daily basis. You know, I used to have a manager who would walk around managing by walking around.
Right.
And he would go around and he would check to see how people are doing, and he would give them some verbal feedback. So it's an ongoing activity, and it builds this working relationship.
I couldn't agree more. Well, listen, Paul, this conversation, as always, is very valuable, and I think we've run up against our time block, and I want to get moved on to Dr. Fan in the next episode to talk more about the competencies specifically and their important role in that. So we're out.